I found myself in 1995 at the age of 35 retiring from professional bodybuilding, and if I'm perfectly transparent, I got to the point where I had outgrown bodybuilding and bodybuilding had outgrown me. Hey, Muscle and Strength, Lee Labrada here, and I am going to be answering some questions today. So I started weight training at the age of 16 after I suffered a football injury. I had sprained my back, basically some pulled back muscles, and I ended up in the gym and quickly found out that I was a better bodybuilder than a football player. So I found my true calling, which was bodybuilding, and I entered my first bodybuilding competition at the age of 17 in Jacksonville, Florida, teenage division, and I won. And I was absolutely surprised that I had won, because I always thought that bodybuilding was about the biggest guy wins. And of course, sometimes that's the case still. However, when all of the results came back that evening, even though many of these teenage competitors outweighed me by 30 or 40 pounds, I still won the show. And I quickly learned that bodybuilding was also about symmetry, proportion, muscularity, definition, or conditioning as they call it these days. So that was my initial foray into bodybuilding, and after that, I was bitten by the bug. I can't say that there was one men's professional physique that inspired me the most. I think that there were several, and of course they included the greats like Frank Zane, Franco Columbo, and then even guys like Mike Mentzer that I really don't have much in common with in terms of physique type, but I really liked his no-nonsense approach to training, high-intensity training. And so that was one of my early influences. Later on, Samir Bannout, who was the 1983 Mr. Olympia, he was a mentor early on for me as well. I got some great inspiration from those physiques. Also, Muhammad Makawe, who was a second place Mr. Olympia at one time. Just great symmetrical, proportionate bodybuilders from back in that golden era. For me, it was about always was about reaching the next level. And when I was first starting out, reaching the next level was being able to compete at and win at the state level. And at one time, I didn't think I was going to be able to get past the state level. And I was perfectly happy. And the reason I was perfectly happy is because I was comfortable with the idea that bodybuilding was helping to improve me. And so it was a competition against myself to see the best that I could be. And so I really did not compare myself to a lot of my peers and whatnot. I just basically strived to be the best that I could be at any level. And then lo and behold, I just kept going higher and higher, higher levels, until I found myself on the professional stage. I think that bodybuilding is one of those sports which has to be approached as a process. And I think that all too often young people are in a hurry. They're in a hurry to go from amateur to professional. And I just keep hearing the amateurs talking about getting their pro card. Well, let me tell you, that process used to take years and years and years back when I was coming up through the amateur ranks, and rightly so. And every year they would literally pick a small handful. And when I say a small handful, probably less than 5 new pros every year. It was that difficult. But by the time that you were ranked as a professional, you were ready to step on the stage at a Mr. Olympia. You were that good. And so I think that we've lost something along the way. You know, I think that pro cards are given out too easily these days. And I think that what happens is that these amateurs, however good they are to win a pro card, they are not nearly good enough to compete in a professional bodybuilding show. And they find themselves as an entry-level pro with a number of years ahead of them, 5, 10 years or more, before they can be competitive, if they're ever competitive, at that next level. And to me, that's a little bit disheartening, you know, because you basically cheat yourself out of the joy of the process. You know, so the joy of basically improving your physique from year to year to year. So the best advice I can give you is, if you're an amateur, don't be in a hurry to climb the ranks. Make sure that you can excel and win easily at one level before you go to the next level.
Very special here tonight.
I think that my body structure and my symmetry is very, very good. And I'm the best in the United States, and I think we're ahead of everybody. So.
Well, you certainly proved that a couple of weeks ago at the Nationals when you won. Took first place in the middleweight class,
That's
right? Are you going to do it again tonight, you think?
I think I'm going to pull it off.
Well, here's a very self-confident young man, Lee Labrada from Houston. I know you've seen him, Chris,
yes.
And you really like him.
He's one of the best physiques I've ever seen. Watch his pose.
Chris, this guy's got great stage presence. Look how relaxed he is. Look at the smile playing to the crowd and the judges.
He's charismatic. He's good looking. He's got it all.
So when I won my professional status by winning the IFBB Mr. Universe, I was also working full-time as a structural engineer, designing high voltage transmission line structures. It was a Spartan life at best, you know, so literally working from 8 in the morning until 5 p.m., going home and getting into my gym clothes, going to the gym, working out for a couple of hours, going back home, you know, doing some food shopping, cooking for myself, eating, going to sleep, and rinse and repeat time after time after time. So discipline really played a big part in my success there. And so I was supporting myself, you know, from something outside of bodybuilding. And so once I won the IFBB Mr. Universe, I didn't waste any time. You know, I sent out information to all of the NPC promoters across the country, letting them know about my availability for guest posing and guest appearances and that type of thing. And then I started lining those up for the following spring. And by the time the spring came around, I had enough work lined up for the rest of the year that I could transition from being an engineer full-time to being a bodybuilder full-time. You know, and so that's a bit of a leap of faith, you know, but it worked in my case. And I still remember my dad, who was an engineer himself, asking me if I couldn't do both at the same time. And so, you know, to be honest, you know, I went from engineering structures to engineering my body, you know, but I was always very careful, you know, in planning next steps and making sure that I had an income. So I think my best package was probably 1989 in Remedy, and then 1992 was a let's call it a bigger version of me.
The 1990 Team of the Olympiad, Labrada arrived in Helsinki at 190 pounds, his heaviest body weight ever, and tested conditioned as in his earlier lighter competition. An altered diet helped Labrada maintain his heavy weight and in better condition than ever before.
That was the heaviest that I ever competed at, which was at about 190 pounds. Now, here's what's interesting, because I say 190 pounds and people's eyes get wide open. You have to understand that back then they didn't have a 212 division. It was an open division. So you had anybody that, ran from, under 200 pounds all the way up to over 250. And at no point in my career was I giving away less than a 30-pound advantage to the next guy up. So I was always 30 to 40, even 50 pounds lighter than the guys that I was competing with. And because of that, I had to have a attention to detail. I could not afford to be 2 or 3 pounds out of shape, 2 or 3 pounds heavier, or not hit a peak perfectly, because then I was easily blown away by a bigger guy. So it made me really pay attention to all of the details, everything from posing, to conditioning, to my suit, to the way I stood on stage, to the tan. I mean, I'd left no stones uncovered. Getting into shape, getting into condition for a bodybuilding show is never an easy task. Okay, and what I remember from that was a process of dieting over a period of 12 to 16 weeks. They still do it to this day. But I will tell you that this concept of extreme suffering is one that is foreign to me. And that doesn't mean that I worked any less hard than the next guy. It's just that my approach to the diet was so systematic, and I had it down so perfectly that I could literally cut 100 or 200 calories a day out of my diet precisely. And so I was able to manipulate and keep my metabolism from slowing down over that period of 3 months leading to the show. I think that what happens a lot nowadays is that they still do what they did back in my day, what the majority of the guys did, which is eyeball the amount of food that they eat, or they only go by the grams and the measurements of the food instead of actually counting the calories and being very precise, keeping that in a day-to-day log and methodically trimming those, or even oscillating the calories periodically. So I had a very scientific approach, and I think that kept me from that starvation mode. I will tell you the same breath that I had periods where I dieted down so hard that it was very, very tough. I remember almost blacking out a couple of times. Okay, but I was always able to handle it mentally, and I was always very scientifically rigorous in my approach. So the training style that I found works best all around is a high-intensity training style. You would look at my physique and you would say, okay, he's a classic bodybuilder. He probably trains with a lot of sets and reps and that type of thing. You'd be surprised. So I built my body using high-intensity training techniques that were developed back in the day by Elliot Darden, the PhD, and that were promulgated by Arthur Jones at Nautilus, and then later by Mike Mentzer and others. And I feel that once that you have warmed up a target muscle, then you should proceed to a training weight that will permit you to do 8 to 10 repetitions max before you reach positive failure, the point at which you cannot perform another repetition. And then what you would do is you would strip about 5 to 10% of that weight off. Okay, rest long enough to catch your breath, and then start that next set, and again go to positive failure. And so I trained like that, doing about 8 to 10 sets per body part throughout my career, and I found that that was what stimulated my muscle the best without risking overtraining.
And our next competitor, one of the very best, Lee Labrada from Houston, Texas, born in Havana, Cuba, a former world champion. He was second in the Arnold Classic back in 1993, and like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lee Haney, he is one of the few people to be in the top 4 at Mr. Olympia competitions for 7 consecutive years.
He's really an outstanding bodybuilder, and he's one of those guys that even though he's only 5'6" tall and weighs only 195 pounds, he's very dangerous. And a lot of the big guys always think that they can beat him easily, and then of course he's almost unbeatable.
I found myself in 1995 at the age of 35 retiring from professional bodybuilding, and if I'm perfectly transparent, I got to the point where I had outgrown bodybuilding and bodybuilding had outgrown me. And what I mean by that is that I was at a stage in my life where I was ready to turn the page and go on to something else. And bodybuilding as a sport was turning the corner and becoming a sport of guys that were a lot bigger than the guys that I competed with in my day. And so it was just time for me to exit. Mentally, I don't recall having a tough time with that, nor physically, because I was already committed to going full-time, full energy into Labrada nutrition and putting all of my creative energy and strength into that. One of the things that bodybuilding teaches you is it teaches you discipline, and another is it teaches you persistence. And I was able to take those and I was able to apply it as I transitioned into the business world. It's just like going to the gym, going to work every day, focusing on those things that are going to cause the growth. In this case, the growth of the business. That was priority number one. So that was a relatively easy change. And then physically, I basically just pared back, but it was a slow process. You see, I'm 170 pounds today as I sit here and talk to you, and you have to remember that the heaviest I ever was 190 pounds with an average weight of about 185. So I'm really only 15 or 20 pounds off from competition weight. And as you're going to see it during this leg workout, the body fat level is still very low. And that's because I always put on muscle judiciously, and I never did things that were going to jeopardize my health in the long run. Because it's one of those things that I'm very fond of telling the youngsters that are involved in the sport today, there's life after bodybuilding.